Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, for those people who are joining us online. Welcome to this very important event, which is the launch of the Strategic Energy Planning Principles, which were co-developed by various development partners and technical organizations as part of the Roundtable Initiative on Strategic Energy Planning. And let me say congratulations. I remember the very first time you came up with this idea, and to see us where we are today is a really good thing. So congratulations and thank you. So we have with us a very good, wonderful panel to take us through the different principles, the different energy planning principles that we're here to launch and talk about. Let me introduce them. So we have, first of all, Dr. Blyth, who is from the UK FCDO, Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office. Again, as I said, something that he initiated and championed, and it's thanks to him that we're here today. We also have joining us online, Ms. Franziska Bock from GIZ. Welcome, Franziska. You can hear us? Wonderful, nice to see you.
Good morning.
We also have Dr. Will Ursher from KTH, Institute of Technology, who is also joining online. Will, welcome. You can hear us? Okay. And of course, we also have our very good friend, Dr. Andrei Grisky from IAEA in Vienna. Good morning, Andrei. You can hear us?
Good morning.
Okay, wonderful.
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you so much. And last but not the least, we have Professor Jairo Quiroz Totos from the University of Costa Rica online. Professor, you can hear us?
Good morning. Yes,
Welcome.
I can hear you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So those are our speakers, our esteemed panel, who will be helping us to go through the different energy planning principles. As I said, have been developed by different development partners, have been endorsed by a good number of them already. But before we go into that, I would like us to have a look at a short video about the energy planning principles. So can we play the video, please?
Strategic energy planning is essential for both effective policy and investment decision-making and for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and economic and human development more broadly. Energy goals that are clear, evidence-based and widely agreed can help align the incentives and actions of key stakeholders towards achieving energy access, energy security, climate action and environmental protection. However, technical support to governments and other agencies to improve energy planning processes is often too fragmented to be effective, or not in line with government priorities, or not based on transparent evidence. The Roundtable Initiative on Strategic Energy Planning seeks to improve data access and the effective use of analysis and evidence by decision makers in developing countries. The development partners involved have developed 5 key principles to collectively improve the effectiveness of their support to country governments on strategic energy planning.
We aim to support country-led energy planning processes that work in partnership with key stakeholders to achieve broad consensus on strategic objectives and plans. We want to help empower the relevant authorities at regional, national, and subnational level to rally stakeholders to implement the plans and push back on proposals that do not align.
We will assist governments to ensure that strategic decisions taken in the energy sector are coherent with broader economic, social, and environmental goals by committing to evidence-based, integrated and inclusive energy planning processes that lead to fair and technically sound energy development programs.
We support governments to strengthen the capability of national institutions to take the lead on strategic energy planning and improve evidence-based decision-making processes in order to fulfill the government vision. We commit to coordinate among development partners to avoid duplication and fragmentation of efforts in responding to government requests for capacity building.
What do we mean with robustness? We want to promote the use of modeling approaches and decision support tools that have 4 pillars. 1, they are accurate in their technical details and strong in their economic foundations. 2, they are fit for purpose to deal with the fast-changing paces typical of the energy sector. 3, they are designed to support flexible and adaptive approaches to energy sector planning. And 4, they are structured in a way that can be regularly updated with ease. This is what we mean with robustness.
We will also promote open access to and transparent review of planning inputs such as data, model design, and assumptions, and encourage key stakeholders to use them, subject of course to government restrictions and commercial confidentiality constraints.
Although they are not legally binding, signatories to these principles commit to incorporating them in their working practice with governments in developing countries. These principles are important for supporting the global energy transition in a way that builds long-term ownership and capacity in line with its Sustainable Development Goals. We therefore call for other organizations supporting strategic energy planning to endorse the principles and join many others in the Roundtable Initiative on Strategic Energy Planning.
Okay, good. No, thank you very much for the video. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are the 5 principles that we're here to launch and talk about. It is very interesting because today is Energy Day here in Glasgow at the COP26. Energy is at the heart of the climate discussion and action that have to be taken. And in the regions where the energy will really be transformative is where the planning is needed the most. And that is in developing countries where the access gap is quite huge. So it is quite relevant that today we're talking about these energy planning principles in the context of climate change, in the context of access, in the context of sustainable development, and in the context of leaving no one behind. So we've seen the 5 principles. I'm going to ask each of our esteemed panelists a question on each of those principles, starting with you, Will. Right? The first one is about national ownership, and this is extremely important. Whose energy system are we planning? Who really owns the planning process? Right? So how do you think then that national and local authorities in developing countries can be better empowered to own the energy planning process? And of course, the subsequent investments that follow. Will.
Thank you very much, Linus. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I've just come across from the Energy Day event on COP26, and I'm just going to preface my remarks with a little bit of an update from there, because I think it's really relevant to this discussion. I think energy planning is going to become massively important. It already was, but I just think listening to the debate over there in the negotiations, it really hits you. So today's Energy Day, as Linus was saying, a lot of commitments and announcements being made in the press today about new commitments. So I'll just read some of these out. There's 28 new OECD countries have joined the Powering Past Coal Alliance. I mean, this is the sort of rich countries, but that takes it to 2/3 of countries now committed to coal phase out from 1/3 a couple of years ago. So that's really ramped up. And then out of the 20 largest coal-using countries, five new ones have now committed to coal phase-out, and this includes some really big ones. So South Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, Poland, and Ukraine. So this is just really a kind of significant moment for. That's on top of announcements made recently about phase-out of finance for coal. So really, coal is on its way out. It's not just countries that are using coal or even planning coal. It's any country that's trying to work out what to build next in this age where we've got such cheap renewables, and working out how to deliver energy access to those who don't have electricity at all. So just to bring that back into the context of your question, essentially all of those commitments are based on some evidence that this is a realistic, achievable thing to do. So countries are now realising what it is they want to do, they don't know. The next question is, how are we going to do this, right? And that's where the planning really comes in. And you really need a virtuous circle. To come back to your question, is the ownership. It's got to be the countries that own this. And you've got to create a virtuous circle where you've got evidence-based policy and planning processes that international partners can align behind, buy into, and that investors can get behind, and it actually starts to create a flow of financing and money. And as soon as you get that connection between the planning process and the plans with the finance, I think that's when the confidence in those plans will build, and you'll start to get that proper sense of national ownership coming in when the plans are starting to be used in anger. So that would be my comments. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Will, and thank you for highlighting that and linking it to the finance, the ownership that links to the finance. And that's very important because now the countries have done their revision of the NDCs as required by the Paris Agreement. In Africa, we, at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, we launched an initiative called the DG7 Initiative, right? It has 3 pillars of sustainability, governance, and then finance. And the idea is that countries had committed NDCs, which they said they will pay for with their own resources, and some that they will pay for based on availability of climate finance. And now they realize that even those actions that they say they will pay for with their own resources, they cannot pay because the money is not there. Now COVID has made the physical space shrunk even further. So it now becomes very important that that initiative is supporting countries to revise their NDCs and make more bankable actions. And energy is critical there because that is where you can have a lot of bankability, where now you can have investments from the private sector. So you're taking out the ownership where countries are using energy access, their NDCs, as a way of planning or informing their energy planning process that then subsequently leads to investment. Then we can support them, of course, with the governance, and then the finance will come. So thank you for bringing that connection. So I'm going to ask the same question to Ms. Franziska Bock. Franziska, the same question about this national ownership in the energy planning process. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Linus. I would say that what we need first and foremost is a bit of a shift in mindset when it comes to our support activities to many developing countries. So whereas very often in the past there has been a bit of a consultant fly-in, fly-out situation when there was international expertise being provided, however it was short-term, and there was a study produced that was then used for further steps. I would argue that we need to have a common understanding both among international experts and, more importantly, so national experts. Yes, maybe we do need this international technical expertise, but without the local knowledge of the local conditions, of what the energy system in the country really looks like, of particular economic characteristics, behavioral characteristics, our efforts are not necessarily really going to represent what is happening on the ground. So the better the involvement of national experts, the higher the quality of our outputs. And by doing so, we also, we by default really increase the ownership. So we make sure that there is more acceptance because people know what is happening in energy planning processes, in particular when it comes to quantitative tools that maybe in the past have been a bit of a black box. Here again, the link also to having maybe the argument in favor of open source tools. I think we really need to go towards more involvement of national experts in depth in the planning processes to have this acceptance and ownership.
Very much, Franziska, and for again highlighting the importance of open source tools as one of the way of ownership, because open source tools means that everybody can understand what is happening, and therefore everybody in the national setup can have that ownership because they understand what it is. Unlike if you had a black box type of situation where somebody flies in, something goes out, then the people in the country don't know what is happening, so they're still not owning that process, right? And when the ownership is there right from the top, then it makes it easier for the financing to come. I mentioned to you about this DG7 initiative. In fact, just about a month ago, we have the first green bond that was issued by PIMCO. PIMCO is one of the biggest asset managers globally, 2.2 trillion, and they issued a green bond with the Development Bank of Southern Africa in local currency for 3 billion because there was that national ownership, so things move fast. So thank you, Franziska, for that. So Dr. Will Ursher from KT, I asked you the same question. What perspectives do you bring into this idea of the importance of national ownership of the energy planning process?
Thanks a lot, Linus, for the question. I work at an academic institution, and we do quite a lot of work in many countries, particularly in Africa, around developing national energy plans with local stakeholders. And so we use exclusively open source tools and as much open data as we can, and attempt to build capacity within countries working with local stakeholders to develop these national energy plans. And I think there's a number of sort of enabling conditions that makes that work a lot easier. And one is, as already been mentioned, the availability of open source tools, and that's sort of almost a solved problem now. There's just a plethora of open source energy modeling tools available. But I'd say data is still a problem, and I think we'll pick that up later. But also the availability of education materials for capacity building, and I think that's something that's something we really need to think about now if we're to develop skills within the countries and to really have national ownership, where you have teams of people within the countries developing the models on their own without international assistance. Then we need people educated to sort of master's level, PhD level in these techniques, and for that we need education material which is available and co-owned by people in those countries.
No, thank you, thank you very much, Will, and also for highlighting the importance of the ownership not only of the process but also of the data that is needed for the energy planning. And we often see that in many situations in the same national setup, different elements are working in silos. So one element has the data, another element has the other part of the data, and so on. So this is an opportunity now where that ownership also come across, where the data is owned nationally and therefore helps in the energy planning process. Thank you. And so, Dr. Andre, I ask you the same question about national ownership. From your perspective, how do you see, especially from the IAEA's lens, this importance of national ownership in the energy planning process?
Thank you, Linus. Yeah, it's quite an interesting question and complicated one. What we think important things to make a whole process sustainable. And that means it may start with training provided by different actors like our partners and organizations and whatever. But ultimate goal is to establish the national capacity building services based on national expertise, on national ownership of the models and tools they're using. And that would ultimately require involvement of academia. It was mentioned by Will. So it's important to understand that capacity building is not one-time efforts. It requires constant kind of updates. It requires new people coming, new expertise going in, and in a planning and in allocating resources, including financial part, we always need to keep that in mind. Unfortunately, that's a reality of our current days, that we typically running relatively short projects. And that's why we probably need to have really truly international cooperation to make this finance in a capacity building sustainable in the long run, and also demonstrate the benefits for national actors to see this process actually well established. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre, again for making the important point about that the national ownership is not just owning the process, it's owning the capacity, it's owning the tools, and so on. And again, you do find in some situations where there's maybe one or two persons that are involved in the process, and if they move, then they've gone. And that ownership is no longer there. So the importance of ensuring that there's a critical mass of people nationally who own the process. It means if one person is no longer there, the process doesn't stop, the capacity doesn't stop. So thank you for that. And Professor Jairo, I ask you the same question. Maybe you can also, like from the perspective of Costa Rica, for example, how do you see the question of national ownership in the energy planning process?
Yes, good morning. Thanks for the question, Linus. And it is very difficult to be at the very end because my colleagues have made excellent points, and now I have to try to pick one of them.
Right.
But let me mention this one in Costa Rica that we have had. We have tried to co-create the models, the analysis, always along with the different stakeholders involved in the energy planning. So what I mean by that is, instead of us, we in Costa Rica, the University of Costa Rica has been supporting the government in the different analysis. And instead of us sitting in our desk and trying to do magic things in our computers, what we try to do is having some different workshops, try to gather the key and the most important aspects of the energy planning from the perspective of the stakeholders. Translate that into aspects that can be modeled within the tools. I also agree fully with the colleagues that we have to push for open source because they are transparent, they are open source, they don't lead to any licensing. And by doing those workshops, what we do is to capture the different aspects, entering them into the models, and bring some information for the stakeholders to co-create the analysis. And I think this word co-creation is so important because at the moment that they see they are involved in the making decision process, which we know they are, they really want to get engaged in the whole analysis and the whole. They want to provide data. Colleagues have mentioned data. So the moment you show them, okay, we can do all this analysis, they say, okay, but I want you to use my data. Here it is. It is confidential. You need to somehow encrypt it. But the data is here. You can use it. It's open for you to do this analysis. And I think that's a great way to improve this national ownership.
No, thank you very much, Jairo, for making that important point, especially about the co-creation. And it is also the important point that leads us to the next principle, which is the one of coherence and inclusivity. And I say that, for example, immediately, I share one quick experience with you. Immediately after the Paris Agreement, we convened in 2016 a meeting of the national focal points for the INDCs, NDCs, and to see what were the experiences of countries, what did they expect. And we had a case of a country, I will not name the country, where the person from the Ministry of Environment was there, who were the people who did the NDCs. They did it in a rush without consultation with the people in the Ministry of Energy. Then the guy in the Ministry of Energy said to his compatriot, I'm sorry, you made that promise, you would deliver it. Did you consult us? Because you said we're going to increase the share of renewables by this amount and so on. And I don't know how you will do it. I'm telling you that you will not do it. So you go and you find out how you're going to deal with that, right? So this important point about co-creation is really very important. And therefore, this issue about coherence to ensure that whatever is being done in the energy planning process is coherent across the whole of government framework, and that it includes all the sectors so that it is quite understood and therefore inclusive. So let me also then ask all our panelists again in the same order. How do you see, how can this concept of co-creation, this concept of ensuring coherence and inclusivity in the energy planning process that address the key pillars of sustainable development, people, planet, and prosperity happen, and this inclusion is maintained? How can, what are your thinking about how this can really be done to ensure that the coherence and inclusivity are all both achieved? So let me go in the same order again, starting with you, Will.
Thank you very much, Linus. I mean, when I was sort of thinking about how to answer this question, we're so used to, those of us who've been working in the energy space for a long time, thinking about the energy trilemma of economy, security, and environment. And to me, it feels like we're in a different space now. It's sort of a historic turning point. The IEA has just sort of come out and said electricity has never been so cheap at any point in history as it is today. And I think it's an incredible moment in history. I think the energy trilemma has really come down to a single technical challenge, essentially, which is to provide reliable and secure electricity. And so that we've got one technical challenge, which is not, it's not an easy one, but that's essentially what all the planning is around. So that's one set of things that need to be fixed. We talked a little bit about money earlier. And then there's a third one. So to me, there's still three things. There's the technical, sorting the money out, and the politics. It's still a very political space, and the whole need to kind of get cooperation between countries. So to me, that's where the sort of three main elements of strategic coherence really come in to the planning space.
Wonderful. No, thank you. Thank you very much, Will. And Franziska, what are your thoughts about the idea of inclusivity, coherence in the context of prosperity, environmental integrity, and social inclusion?
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually a big fan of having a highly participatory approach when setting up tools for energy planning, really. And we try to do so really by fostering the dialogue between the energy sector and related fields, or generally the fields involved, so we're not exclusively working with the energy sector, and also stressing the need for having really the complementarity of different tools in the process. So maybe to give you an example, we currently are working together with the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development in Uganda for the development of a maybe uncommonly so macroeconomic model. So they are our main partner there, but we are also in very close dialogue with the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, of course with its economic expertise, but also with the Ministry of Water and Environment, which is in charge of the NDC process, LTS process. And we try to bring these people just together on a frequent basis and discuss the modeling development process. So what kind of assumptions do we have here? What kind of scenarios do we want to look at? And by doing so, foster really this shared understanding, not only of how this particular tool works, but also how do those different people with their different mindsets approach such an activity. In doing so, trying to make sure that, of course, the different, not only the different perspectives, but the priorities also to a certain degree are represented. Maybe a fairly time-consuming process as compared to something that is really straightforward with one partner only, but I really do believe in the benefit of having this dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Franziska. Indeed, that is extremely important. And having the inclusion in this process. A friend once said to me, he's a non-technical person, right? He said, you guys keep talking about clean cooking stoves and you keep talking about this, and I don't think you're making progress. And I said, why? He said, you see, because you are not bringing the health people. If you look at clean cooking as a health issue, you will make more progress. And I think that's a very important point, right? So we spend all the time now trying to plan about how we can reduce this 2.6 million people who have no access to clean cooking. And we're just talking to the energy people and the finance people, but we're not seeing it as a health issue, because if you had the health people involved, because the consequence of people not having access to clean cooking is that you have these millions of people who die every year from indoor pollution. So if we had an inclusive way of looking at it, it means that the health people probably would be the ones championing. Maybe the initiative would be sitting in the Ministry of Health, not in the Ministry of Energy, and then that will make a big process in the planning then, because there is that inclusion. So thank you for that. Will, what do you think about this idea of ensuring coherence and inclusivity?
Yeah, thanks. I think there's an important role for development partners and for academics to use their modelling and approaches to try and foster dialogues between different parts of a national government. In every case when they go into a country to support a development and energy planning. I think models are a really interesting way to bring people together from different perspectives and use them basically as a mechanism for the dialogue. And it's actually that dialogue often which is more valuable than the results from the model. There are a few examples of this, but I think want to make another point rather than showing an example, which is that increasingly, as we decarbonize and as we look to go to ever lower carbon energy systems, it brings up some very pressing cross-cutting issues, particularly around the role for biomass and then the consequences on land use, interactions with food system and also water. And so I think this sort of the nexus concepts and this idea that there are really strong interactions between climate, land, energy, and water will become ever more evident and important to highlight in what would otherwise just be an energy planning process. So I think an integrated approach to energy is an urgent and more pressing need, particularly as we try and meet our climate goals.
No, thank you very much, Will, for making that emphasis on the nexus, the importance of the nexus integrated approach to the energy planning process. That is extremely important. Then that way we can ensure coherence, because without that nexus, without an integrated approach, we cannot ensure coherence. And without the integrated approach, we cannot have this inclusivity. So the same question then to Andre.
Thank you. A lot of things was already said. What I want to add is we all understand the importance of the data, especially reliable data. And we definitely need to have involvement of statistical offices, and not necessarily offices which is collecting data on energy, but also, like it was mentioned, everything which is related to nexus kind of relation. And that's not only important because we definitely need the data, but it needs to be explained. And people that actually collecting it, understanding it, analyzing these things are critically important in setting up models and also do a proper, how to say, interpretation of what could be outcome from models. And another things I want to mention, which again will mention, it's involvement of people from academia, and it's maybe a bit of different angle. We need to involve young people in the process very early, because they bringing a completely new perspective, not in term of technology, using method probably we're not really even aware of, but really to make the whole things inclusive and sustainable, we need to listen to that. And as a person who is quite old, we definitely need to put them early in this loop, so their contribution could be critical, and specifically when we talk about energy and climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jairo, for that. And that's very important about this issue about who must be included. You mentioned about dialogue and who should be included in the conversation. I mentioned about the people of health and so on. So maybe just have another quick thinking. Who else do we think are often excluded from this dialogue, from this approach, where we need to have this all of across nexus approach to energy planning? We've seen that sometimes academia is excluded, health people are excluded. Who else is critically important that should be part of this, that maybe from the experience we feel that they are often excluded? Just a quick say of who you think. So, Jairo, what do you think about who are the people that we tend to often leave out in the conversation that should be part of not only the dialogue but also the planning process?
Yeah, interesting question. So many times when we are designing the energy system in different countries, we tend to keep apart the society. So we don't listen to society many times, and that's something that we in Costa Rica have been trying to tackle by executing massive workshops. I can tell you an example for the updating process of the NDCs. We had workshops with around 200, 300 people And it was really complex because we had a pandemic, so it couldn't be, everything had to be virtual. So dealing with 300 people in a workshop, listening to different people, we actually had to come up with smaller groups. But we actually included even small communities. The director of climate change had a really, really interesting approach, and we actually interview people in communities that are not normally excluded, Aborigines in Costa Rica. So there are about 4,000 people out of 5 million in Costa Rica. But we actually interviewed them and listened to them. They were telling us, okay, look, we've been cooking with wood, that's really causing health issues. So based on that, we were wondering, okay, so how can the planning of the energy system be done in a way that we include the perspective of these people? So at least I feel like in Costa Rica hasn't really been the case of excluding society, since we've been actually incorporating them lately. But we have to recognize that it is normally the case that we exclude small societies, small groups of people in this design. I also agree with the health counterparts, also MDBs. Sometimes we need the finance support from MDBs to carry out this analysis. So it's also important that we keep them in the loop.
No, thank you very much, Jairo, for that. And I can see that the questions are already coming, and the questions about exactly this point. So let's go through the principles, and then we'll come back and address those. But I can see already about like some of these stakeholders that normally seem to be in the fringe of the process, how we can bring them in. So, that is our second principle. The third principle is that of capacity. So we talked about capacity, why it is important and why it has to be available and who should own the capacity within the system. But have you got any good practices to share on how to address the problem of capacity, retention at the national or organizational level? Because at the beginning we talked about the idea that you couldn't have people, one or two people in the ministry who have the capacity, they have the technical know-how. Sometimes they move on, then what happens? So if you have some experiences to share about how you retain that capacity or ensure that when people move on, we don't lose the capability of national technical capacity. So let me go now back in reverse order, starting with you, Jairo, especially coming from the national perspective about some of these examples on how to ensure the retention of capacity.
Yes, I think I will pick up some of the comments from colleagues previously. First, this installing this capacity at the university, in the case of Costa Rica, was quite successful, because we've been there and we've been updating the models, we've been updating the analysis to support the government. And this capacity building will be independent of any political party that will be in Costa Rica in the next couple of years, provided that we have to select new president in 2022. So the university will remain, it is independent of any political. So the analysis will continue to be robust. Okay, something very important that we had in Costa Rica is we built capacity along with international experts in the field. So in this particular case, we collaborated with KTH, with Will here in the meeting, Mark Howells, and a colleague from KTH that also provided technical support to the team. They created capacity in the country, and now this capacity, it's really there to support the government in analysis decisions, along with clearly finance from different NDBs that are supporting the government of Costa Rica with technical assistance. So that's, I think, one of the best good practices that I could suggest. Work with academia to have that capacity installed in academia, so then the universities can support the government independently of the political party.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jairo, for sharing those perspectives from the country, university perspective for Costa Rica. Andre, any good examples of how we not only develop but retain capacity in the national setting or framework for energy planning?
Yes, we do have a couple of really good examples, and in this case, where, let's say, our support ended at a certain period of time, other organizations like renewable agencies, they also start providing a support. We try to engage the same people and try to create our atmosphere. So we didn't left really. We didn't have a formal running project, but participated in activity of other institutions, including activity of your institution. That's very important. So it's quite important to create a national network of the experts that can talk to each other and can train each other. And in few cases, we saw really absolutely new names, young people coming and doing this capacity building within the country and sometimes within the region. And I think that's the right approach to go. So I feel the most, how to say, as a really happy person when I learn that the country and the region actually running their own courses and we're not even a part of it. That means they're capable of keeping this expertise and they're capable to take over. You're right, absolutely. Sometimes people are moving from one institution to another. What is important that they passing these skills and knowledge to other people. And there is no, I believe, universal recipe how it could be done properly. For each country, it's probably different. But one of the important things is to see a real impact when people are putting efforts, doing studies, creating certain kind of guidance, what could be done, what could be sustainable, what's the climate compatible. It's important for them to see it's really have impact on policymakers. So establish this dialogue within the countries. And to some point, we can help with these things. And the last point, we need to give them materials, which hopefully could start a part of energy-related curriculum, which they can establish in their own country. And in fact, we also could benefit from that because academia in that country definitely can enhance it based on tools they're using. Yes, open source is very critical in this case and is basically trying to build a better future by working together, breaking barriers within the country as well as between the countries and different group of actors from different, like international organizations, donors, and a private sector as well.
Indeed, thank you very much, Andy, for making that important point. And that is exactly, indeed, I think it's also re-emphasizing the point that Professor Jairo was making, but it also underlines or underscores the point that the reason why we in Africa chose to sign up to the Global Energy Modeling Platform Framework, because by so doing, you bring a group of people together, not only from one country, but from multiple countries to build the capacity related to academic institutions, the universities. We had the University of Cape Town this year. A few weeks' time now, we'll be going to University of Mauritius. And then over a period of time, that network of universities working with each other in the region, and maybe Mark, sometime in the future, working across regions. So the Energy Modeling Platform for Africa can sometime now begin to work with the Energy Modeling Platform for Europe, Asia, and so on, so that this capacity grows, and then this community of users and sharing of practice, good examples, and so on can prevail, and then ensure that we will always have a good supply of capacity. So thank you for that. And then Will Usher, any thoughts about good practices on retaining capacity?
Yeah, thanks. I think a lot has been said, so I won't repeat those. But I think the key points for me is that Andrew highlighted the importance of thinking of this as an ecosystem of academia, of the private sector, and of government. And I think if you think of those three sort of sectors, and that ideally you have individuals who are experts in energy or integrated modeling in each of those, and they can work together somehow through this network, and you will probably get movement of individuals across those three sectors, and that's, from the perspective of energy planning, then that's a good thing. You try and retain then these individuals within your national planning framework. Yeah, I don't think I've got much more to say, so I agreed with everything that was said. Thanks.
No, wonderful. Thank you, Will. And Franziska, maybe GIZ has some examples of some of the interactions you've been having with different countries, the support you've been providing to different countries, or some of the things that you've been able to do to support the retention of capacity.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would second what all of the other speakers already have said. We are also strongly in favor of, again, having a highly participatory approach and, of course, involving local expertise, which in this realm is often found in academia. We have ongoing work, for example, in Tunisia, where we supported the creation of a consortium between governmental agencies as well as the National Engineering School of Tunis. So there actually is a signed memorandum of understanding between those parties saying, okay, we want to do this together. We want this university to support us by producing quantitative analyses on the energy sector and the development of the energy sector for policymaking purposes. So fostering this dialogue really is something that we're very engaged in, and maybe adding on a point to that. So what I think is then a job that us as international organizations or development agencies have on our to-do list is to support our partner countries, the political partners, in this process. So, I mean, it's the one thing to say we should foster this ecosystem and involve academia. However, very often our direct counterparts, and those, of course, by default, in charge of energy planning processes are government agencies, right? So unless they are in favor of this, it's probably not going to happen, or at least not in an effective way. So it's our job maybe to support them and showing up what are the advantages of doing this. So what are the advantages maybe of thinking about having quantitative analyses produced by outsourcing it to academia, for example, or by having some sort of a hybrid setup, maybe a semi-public think tank or something, over doing those analyses in-house in the ministries that are already overburdened by a lot of the ongoing climate and energy planning processes. So this also links again to the question of having open source tools, right? If I want to have a tool and the data able to use it in such an ecosystem, I also have to grant access to the data and the assumptions and all these underlying things. So this is something I believe we really have on our to-do list. Foster this dialogue with the partners and show up, why is this actually maybe something that is beneficial for you in many different regards? What are the advantages of having such a more open process?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Franziska. And I think that is also very important in the context that in addition to having so many people that are being trained and cooperation on that training process, but doing so in such a way that you're supporting this open availability of tools and data and so on, increases the confidence also in the people to be able to continue doing that. But I think there's also the need for an incentive, right? An incentive in the sense that if you want to attract people to train or to undergo this training, they have to probably see some incentive in the sense that in addition to learning the tools, what else can I get from it? Maybe I can accumulate some credits. Later on, I can use it. Then more people get interested. And then the more people that get interested, the more that are trained, then the less the fear of that if people move, there will be shortage because there will all be capacity when you're linking with the think tanks and academia and so on. So Will, what do you see as other examples of how we can support the retention of capacity or support countries with not only the development of the capacity, but also its retention?
Thank you. Points made. I think that your point there about the skills and building up that knowledge is absolutely crucial. And to me, the only thing I would add to that is somehow we need to work out how to raise the status of those jobs. Some of the countries I've worked in, the energy planning units are somewhere buried down inside the energy ministry without a huge amount of status. And the people inside that don't have a huge amount of status. Whereas actually what we're talking about is a massively important national strategic issue. It affects the budgets, it affects, national security in some cases. And so this really needs to be elevated, the status of the units themselves and the status of the people inside it, to make use of the kind of knowledge you were just talking about and make that sort of an aspirational. And there's a virtuous circle between creating high quality plans with high quality people, high quality training, high quality tools and so on within those units, which are demonstrably affecting decisions that are being made, policy decisions, investment decisions and so on. And I think that's where you'll start to create a self-fulfilling kind of, people want to be there. So that would be the only thing I'd add to the points made earlier. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Will. And so those are the first three principles. The next one, principle number 4, is robustness. And I want to come back to start with you, Will. What constitutes a robust energy planning principle, and how can we support governments to ensure that the principles framework that they develop are quite robust, and ensure that they are not reinventing the wheel, ensure that they are making the best use of what is there, so that this principle can become robust. So help us unpack again what robust means in terms of these principles, and then how can we support governments to synergize and make use of what is there so that what they have is really robust and fit for purpose.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a really essential one. And I think we should start this conversation by just recognising that plans can and should change. Andre pointed out earlier that capacity building is not a one-off effort, it's a continuous process, and the same is true for the planning process itself. But I think you're right, there is a risk that the international community comes along and sees a plan that's a bit out of date, or something's about it they don't like, or it's been done by somebody else that they don't agree with, and you just think, okay, let's ditch that and start again. And this is, I think, a perennial sort of problem, and we've got to start to build, I keep going on about this sort of virtual circle, but a sort of a sense of trust and buy-in to a process that people can, as you say, build on rather than keep starting from scratch again. So I think that you need a basic sense of the starting point has to be good enough that you get a buy-in. And what's so great about this partnership, I think, and the groups around this table, is that the international community is coming together around a process to get its own act together. So I think that's the first sort of point to solving this. And the second is that the planning units need to have the tools and data. And I know there's a question coming up on data. Data is an issue. I think it's expensive to create, but there's really exciting things out there which other people know much more than I do about in terms of tapping big data, social media, other ways of collecting data. It's the same across development. Transformations in the way data is collected, and also addresses some of the points I think coming up on Slido as well about how you engage civil society within the planning process. Because if you can tap into that sort of alternative sources of information, so you're not just going out relying on surveys, but actually collecting what's there, getting it more engaged, and that's how you can start to build systems which are more responsive to what people need and be a bit smarter about the way these things are developed. So I think that's what we, in my mind, think about is meant by robustness.
Indeed. No, thank you, Will. And again, as you say, this ecosystem of international partners coming together to help develop tools, but we have a plethora of tools, right? Mark has a couple of tools, Irina has a couple of wonderful tools, IAE has a couple of wonderful tools, and so on. So how can we, in this process, ensure that we tap the best of those tools so that we have a really robust energy planning process that then informs good investments that we can begin to see, right? So that is also another element of ensuring that happens. So Andre, in this context of robustness, in this context of ensuring that we make the best of what is there and not reinvent the wheel, and in the context that we have all these wonderful tools across the ecosystem of people who have come together, which is again a great thing, Will, that through this initiative you have been able to bring all of these people and they're all sitting on the table and talking to each other, and hopefully we'll begin to see the impact when they go to support the countries. But Andrew, what do you see as some of the ways that we can make this to really support the robustness of energy planning in countries?
It's an excellent question, and you start from the right things. The worst things we can do going in circle, repeating the same mistake again. And the only way to make things better is to look what we did in the past and learn from these mistakes to improve our whole process, maybe inventing new approaches and doing things quite differently. But if you don't know what was done already in the past, if you don't learn your lessons, what's worked really well and what didn't, there is a really serious risk to going circle, repeating the same things and with no really achieving a progress. So in every case, successful case, we had in our quite extensive technical cooperation program, we can build better models, tools, and processes only when things are really well documented. So I know it's a very tedious kind of a process. I know that sometimes it leads to certain problems. Who own the data? Which, in my opinion, that's well addressed by United Nations Statistical Committee, saying it's a national ownership. And we're living in 21st century. We should understand that most of the data, do you like it or not, is actually open data. I'm really very much against of putting copyright on some restriction on that. It doesn't really work. So what we need to assure that parties which is holding either tools, data, and helping actors that's doing their analysis fully understand that working together, bringing more benefits rather than trying to live in their own isolated, silos. So it's absolutely critical to preserve what was done. And it's important to have assumptions very well documented, because that's the only way to move forward. Actually, don't think that tools are so much important. Sound pretty strange, right? What is important is a model, so how you actually apply them. And if you have your things are well documented, things are well put it, and it's clear what is going in your tool, it's easy to actually reproduce it in another one. So that would be really important to work on.
Thank you, Andre. Yes, no one tool can do everything. Every tool has its own strengths and weaknesses, and being able to understand those strengths and weaknesses means that we can make the best use of those tools in a combination, in a cooperation framework, to have robust planning, and therefore leading to best investment decisions. Thank you for that. So, Will Ursha, any perspectives on that same issue about robustness and ensuring that we don't reinvent the wheel, but we make the use of every what is out there?
Yeah, I think Andre raised the key point here, which is that, yeah, it's really important to ensure that your work can be reproduced and built on in the future. And I guess the question I have is, well, why doesn't that happen already? And of course, when you're building a national energy plan or doing some modeling, it's well, you're focused on producing those results and supporting the policy decision or whatever it is that your modeling is for. And I guess the important thing to emphasize is that if you want to create this reproducible piece of work, you need to start from the very beginning with that in mind. That has to be the intention from the outset. And it's extremely difficult at the end, after you've delivered your report or your modeling results, to then say, oh, actually, we want to make this open and reproducible. So I think, the message is start with that as the goal from the outset, and ensure that that's written into contracts when you get other people to do the modelling, and that you build that into the plan for your national energy modelling unit from the get-go.
Thank you, Will. Indeed, so having mutual recognition of the different tools that are there and what they can or cannot do, and being taking note of that right from the beginning and throughout the process is critically important if we're going to end up with a robust energy planning process. Franziska, any thoughts on that same issue?
I would, first of all, second what the speakers before me have just said. I also believe that it is crucial to have this coordination and this documentation, most importantly, of previous efforts, of ongoing efforts, and we have to talk about it with other development partners. I would, in that sense, also like to bring up that throughout this initiative, there has also been another set of goals produced. So the Euphoria goals of energy modeling for policy support, right? So they basically sum this up and suggest, okay, when we carry out modeling activities, we should make sure that these and these principles are being followed, that we should have this proper documentation of what is going on in the model, where does the data come from, what kind of assumptions do we do, what kind of data manipulation have we done, what kind of software environment are we using, all these things to make sure we really hand over a neat package of all the required information for future users, also to our partners. Providing them, in doing so, the opportunity to also really get engaged in the work. And I believe that by really building this national ownership and by fostering this process, at the same time, maybe also the partners will be really happy with what is happening if they have their say in the beginning, from the onset, and really can shape the direction in which this is going, and not just being handed some study that was conducted on a desk somewhere else. If they have this ownership, they may also not want to shift in a totally different direction when the next project comes along. If I might take the opportunity, actually, I already saw that there was a question raised on how can we then make sure that consultants do make their workings open. And Will, you already mentioned it just before me, by putting it literally in the contract. So these Euphoria goals in 2 projects we currently have ongoing, or one of them ongoing, one about to start very soon. We did just that. There is an annex attached to the terms of reference saying, these are the Euphoria goals, you will have to comply by them. And if we make that sure from the onset that this is the sort of environment we want to work in, these are our goals, of course that has some implications for what sort of institutes will be applying maybe, or will be handing in their offers. So I'm not saying that this is not continuing the process as usual, right? So there are some differences, but of course we do have, in that sense, the power to make sure that there is an open source tool used.
No, thank you, Franziska, and also thank you for taking that question of the first and popular question there about how you ensure this process of openness that then leads to robustness. And Jairo, so from the university perspective, how, because you have an open space, so to speak, where you can try, you have the freedom to try different things and so on, because that is what universities do, and you want to extend the limits and so on. How do you see the kind of role that universities, your kind of academic institutions can help in ensuring the robustness of the planning process? It's gone up. Right. Okay, I was wondering what was happening there. Okay. Right. Okay. So that's fine. So I think the conversation we've had so far about the robustness is now leading to the critical, important point that you have all made about the need for transparency and accessibility, right, for the energy planning processes and the tools to be credible, to be fit for purpose. That is extremely important, and that is why there is transparency and accessibility in terms of the data, in terms of the assumptions and how they are documented, so everybody knows, how did we get this result? What were, and Holger used to say, You have the assumptions, then you have the tools, then you have the results. But of all of these, the most important is the assumption, because it is what then influences the results. So before we start making any sense or decisions from the results, we have to understand the assumptions that were made and how the tools were used, if they were really fit for purpose. And one way of doing that is through this documentation, openness, accessibility, sharing, the ecosystem, the euphoria, and so on. So, so how much do you think there is merit in the thinking of the conception that open data and open source models are of lower quality than commercially owned ones, right? Because the open data, open source is that there is this openness, accountability. There's, you can document, and then you can even try, you can experiment, you can go on your own way, adapt it to suit your principles and so on. But then there is a narrative that as a trade-off of having that flexibility, of having that capability, you're also compromising to a certain level the quality. How relevant or how truthful is this idea that because it's open source, then it is not as robust or as comprehensive as licensed tools? Maybe I start with you. Welcome back, Jairo. Okay. So maybe let me start with Andre on this issue about the open source tools, that they may not be, they are of a lower quality than commercially available or commercially owned ones. What do you think? Is there merit to that thinking? Andre?
Hi, can you hear me? Because I had a bit of problem with your voice, but I think I fully understand the question.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. No, we're now on principle number 5, which is about transparency and accessibility. And we just kind of like preface the conversation by talking about why open source tools and openness to data and accessibility are critical for transparency, for accessibility. But then there is an argument that open source tools cannot be as of good quality as commercially owned or developed tools. And I'm asking, is there any merit in that thinking? Or is there some demonstration or some ideas to show how open source tools could be, or if they are, of the same type of quality and standard as commercially owned ones?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very clear question. And for me, answer is very clear too. With my 30 plus years as an energy modeler and energy analyst, I can tell you definitely, open source tools are not only of the same quality, but sometimes are even more superior than commercial one. And the reason for that is quite simple, because we can engage much broader community to contribute to development of these tools. It's also give ability of the people to do a checks, improvement, find the mistakes. There is no code without mistakes, you know that, and incorporate improvements much faster. So we can have much broader communities that contributing. And I think maybe in the 20th century, we thought about a closed commercial software is a better quality. In the 21st century, is definitely not the case. So when you see what Microsoft is doing with open source, in the previous, I'd say 20 years ago, they definitely didn't embrace this concept. And now the most of their valuable products are actually open source. That's very surprising. And I can imagine one day we're going to see a source of the Windows released. If you look at what is Apple is doing and the most influential tools they have and the most, I'll say, the strongest thing they have, it's a very good compiler which is behind of their product. It's open source tool. It's a really great one. I think there is no question. Open source is a way to move forward, and there are multiple reasons why it could be really like that. Talking about open data, because you also mentioned that, I think that it's very clear that statistical data, an objective of official statistical data, to make it accessible for public and to any actors. And every country, pretty much every country, accepted these principles of fundamental principle of official statistics. And honestly, when I look in a closed or commercial data, in many cases, it's based on the same open source data collection. So probably that's the only way to move forward. And I can guarantee you that by using open models, specifically in energy, you're not really compromising any sort of the quality. Or we in our organization are moving in that direction. So one of the obstacles we have, because many of our tools actually produced and released quite a while ago, and at that time we didn't have any sort of idea what kind of open source license we could attach. So it's slightly different licenses, but every client, every member states are entitled to get a source code and support. So yes, I think a question is very clear. Answer is to me very clear too. Open source tools are really great, and it's a way to move forward.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you very much, Andre, and for making that case for open source tools as opportunity for innovation, opportunity for interoperability, and opportunity for flexibility, right? So that is very, very good. So open source is not lower quality. And as you say, it's actually, in principle, better quality than commercially owned because it is open. You can interrogate, you can innovate, and you have communities of practice that share knowledge, and we are in the generation of sharing, so you can only get better. So thank you for that. Franziska, what do you think about this idea of open source versus commercially developed tools?
As I already said before, I'm absolutely in favor of also using open source tools and promoting the use of open source tools generally also in the dialogues we have. I would, however, say that, I mean, you indicated already in the question, there's sometimes it's sort of this rumor going around, right? People sometimes do ask this question. So are they really of the same kind of quality? I would argue that there are just some characteristics that might be different when it comes to open source tools than when you have commercial ones, right? And addressing these differences and having a dialogue about those, and doing so we can excuse me, in doing so we can really support this this process of acceptance also. We did work in one country, for example, where we had the case that using an open source tool that was very flexible, offering all sorts of opportunities for adaptation. So if you can really work on the code and change everything, they said, how do I know it's any good? If I can, I could do whatever with it and it wouldn't work anymore. So how do I get this kind of assurance that what I'm doing here is really reflecting the system? So this perceived standardization of tools that are more closed because you just don't have this degree of flexibility also can offer some assurance. And on that aspect, I would say that we need to maybe also talk more about the kind of expectations we generally have for the use of quantitative tools. So do we expect this kind of crystal ball outcome that says this exactly is going to happen if we carry out this development path? Or should we regard it a little bit more as what it really is, the kind of an indication of what might happen under a lot of very specific assumptions. So I think this is also really linked to this topic of open source due to the flexibility. One additional point maybe to have that out there, a question that definitely is out there is if we do offer open source tools, how can we assure that there is also technical support, not only now, but also 5 years from now, 10 years from now? So I think this is a valid point, and given that there's a large number of open source tools, having really being also able to provide support on what sorts of frameworks are really useful and where might there be this support available in the future, that is a crucial point. If, however, as an international community, we decide that we do want to go in this direction, we of course also have means of assuring that there is technical support, right? So it's really something we could also foster.
No, thank you, Franziska. So with open source tools, we have confidence, even confidence in understanding or being confident about the limitations. That is a good thing because at least you have that confidence that this is the strength or that this is the limitation of the tools, and therefore you're in a better position to make them even better. So thank you for that. Jairo, what do you think about this idea of open versus licensed tools?
Yeah, this is an excellent discussion, and certainly I am so in favor of open source software, particularly for developing countries, as we can reduce significantly the burden of accepting or purchasing licensed software. But I might one step back and think before whether this should be commercial or open source. And at the end of the day, what we have to do is to understand that policymakers, what they need is to understand the goods and bads of every energy plant. Despite if you do it with open source or commercial software, the most important thing is that you comply with transparency, that you can audit the analysis, that it's completely opened to people. So stakeholders can really interrogate the model. So when you do this analysis, it should be compliant with euphoria principles, as Franziska was mentioning before. And I wanted to make that point when I was planning my answer to the previous principle about robustness. We really have to be compliant with euphoria principles. And one important one is the auditability. Our models have to be capable of being audited. They have to be also reproducible. This is very important, and I wanted to, in my notes, I wanted to mention the case of Costa Rica. I mean, since we begin the building of models here in the country, everything has been written on the internet. Everything about the models that we are using in Costa Rica are freely accessible. So if you just Google Osmosis Costa Rica, you will find the links to all the description of the models. So how it was built, what data was used, what are the projections we are using. Everything is transparently communicated to different stakeholders and to international community, so it can be double checked, as we will say. Even the model itself is freely available on the GitHub. So you can just Google Costa Rica Osmosis GitHub, and you will find the full model that was used to inform the National Decarbonization Plan of Costa Rica. So we haven't really kept anything for ourselves. Everything is there for the society. And that's very important, because there are many countries today that are trying to do this and follow the steps of Costa Rica in developing their national strategy towards 2050 carbon neutrality goal. And they don't have to start from scratch. They can start from a very detailed model, and we recently, with the collaboration of an international community, created the starter kits for different communities, for different countries in the world. So they actually have a starter kit that can use, and if by following the path, I think following the path of Costa Rica, I think great things can be done. So transparency, accessibility. It's great that Francesca was mentioning about this commitment that is being established in contracts with different consultancy firms. But it should be in our DNA, actually. We should have that embedded in our analysis. We shouldn't be in a contract. It should be like part of the results in our DNA, as I said. So yes, transparency is critical, and we have been very transparent in all our analysis. And as I said, everything is publicly available. I'm happy to continue discussing this, how we did it in Costa Rica and why we did it. It also granted access to stakeholders. The moment they saw that everything was publicly available, they were very happy. And in fact, just to finish with this one, and apologies, I want to use my 2 minutes from the previous intervention that I couldn't do. So the moment that we make everything public, the biggest national electricity company in Costa Rica started using some of the data that we made publicly for their internal planning. So they say, oh, look, these guys in the UCR made this data publicly available, and they started some sort of matching their data that they previously had with the data that we collected. And now it's integrated. We have this national vision of the whole energy system, and they're looking at the electricity sector, but it is compliant. They talk to each other. even though they have their own software, their own tools, and we have our national tools, but they are compliant to each other. And that's really great from my perspective.
Indeed, Jairo, confidence building in the tools and therefore in the decision-making process. Will Ursha, any thoughts about open source versus proprietary and the strengths of open source?
We talked about quality of open source models and tools, and I think I do agree with all of the other speakers that yes, open source is the way forward for transparent energy planning. And really, we're talking about quality of the insights that you obtain from these tools, and there's no doubt that these are of the same or better quality as a closed or proprietary tool. However, as Franziska said, that the quality of the user experiences of open source tools is often not as high. These tools often don't come with polished user interfaces that you might see in some commercial software. And so you do need then this team a team of energy modelers to help run these types of tools. But the benefits for transparency and accessibility in the short to long term are so much higher than for the use of commercial tools that I think the costs far outweigh the benefits far outweigh the costs. I'd like to pick up the issue of data. I think there is a quality issue with some open data sets, but there's also quite a lot of potential to harness the open and local communities to help collect data, sort of citizen science approach to supporting energy data. And I think there's definitely potential to organize projects to help collect data. There's a bit of a split incentive problem with data in many regions, where there either isn't the funds available public funds available to collect data, and therefore the data set just doesn't exist, which means that that data can't then be used in energy planning. Or there is a private company which jumps in to collect the data, but then there's large costs to purchasing that data, and again issues with transparency. We're not sure on the provenance of the data and how it was collected and so on. And so I think there is a role for public funds and potentially for development aid to support the curation of public data sets where these are seen. We're also seeing the use of AI and satellite and remote sensing technologies to help collect new data sets. And I think that's a really exciting development that will help with the process of energy planning.
Thank you, Will. So this is really important. And so we have that these set of principles help us, particularly this number 5 about transparency, data accessibility, that we can have a virtuous circle where the tools the tools get better. Through the use of the tools, we improve the data quantity and quality, and because of the sharing and so on, we basically end up in a situation where we have a kind of plug, adapt, play system that can help in investment planning for the energy transition. So we have exactly 5 minutes left, and we have 4 questions. I'm going to read the questions, and then I will ask our esteemed panelists to answer any of the questions that they feel most comfortable with. The first question is, what is needed so that the principles can be institutionalized and applied in planning and policy making at the country level? That's the first question. The second question is from our participant, Ben, is asking, is capacity building the right focus? It implies that superior knowledge or tools are held elsewhere. Shouldn't we primarily support national ownership? That's question number 2. Question number 3 is, this is general for everybody. How can the strategic principles ensure that knowledge transfer and capacity remains in the country and nurtures ownership? I think we've talked about some of this already? And then the last question is, how do we package solutions that bring tools and principles as a coherent bundle, yet tailored to specific national needs and context? So those are the four questions that we have. And I will just call on our speakers in the order that they appear, and you answer any of those questions or any two of them as you see fit. Starting with you, Franziska.
Thank you. I'd actually like to come back to Ben's question. So is capacity building really the right focus, or should we rather support the national ownership and empowering energy planners? I would say this is a very good question, and I would agree that the focus should be on building national ownership. So what we can do as an international community is share our knowledge and share what we maybe have been doing, what tools we have been developing and using as examples. However, I'm not a fan of using words like best practice and copy pasting approaches. So supporting really our partners across the world in building up this national ownership, we can show these examples and say, okay, we provide you with our toolbox, and we will be ready to support you in adapting it to your own needs and really making it your tool. So in that sense, I think it's a very important statement he makes here.
Thank you. Will Usher.
Hi. Yep. So I wanted to respond to Ben's question as well. Maybe with a slightly different slant to Franziska, but I mean, I think it is important to do both. I think there's knowledge to share from KTH, but also Jairo's experience in Costa Rica is also incredibly valuable, and he's been working on supporting other partners, other countries around the world in following in Costa Rica's footsteps. So I think this doesn't have to be a kind of sort of superior or like teacher-student thing. It's more of a sharing of experience, and our role is to really facilitate that and support that. So I think the framing is important here, I understand, but I think there definitely is a lot we can do to share knowledge, and we're happy to do so.
Great, thank you. Andre?
On a Ben question, I don't see really a contradiction in for our interpretation of capacity building. A national ownership is one of the key elements, and so yes, without there is no really capacity building in our view. So talking about superior knowledge, there is no such things clearly, and what we can do, we can share experience we have, experience our partners have, experts, and maybe people in the region. And we also learn a lot by working with a country. So to a last question, how to package a solution so it is actually relevant for these specific countries. We have well-established practices how to work with a country. It's not us that telling what country need to be doing during the capacity building project. We're defining this objective and goal together, so it's actually fit a specific situation. That's the only way to ensure that it will be properly packaged. So their questions versus support they needed versus tools and expert need to be matched, and that's how we actually doing our technical support cooperation program.
Thank you. And Professor Jairo.
Thank you, everyone, for the intervention. And I started my comments today with one key word, and I want to end it with the same word: co-creation. I think co-creation is key for all planning purposes, because at the moment we start co-creating, and when I mean co-creation, I mean with the stakeholders, local stakeholders, international support, NDPs, bringing technical support as well as finance support, international support from experts in other areas, local support, listening to local governments, listening to people in the country, civil society, etc. The moment we start co-creating, we will engage with people and therefore more likely to have buy-in from our ministers and deployment the studies that we are carrying out.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Our time is up, but we do have colleagues in the room as well. I don't know if there is any burning question from any of the colleagues in the room before we thank our panelists and close. Right, okay, so no question from the room. And so it remains for me to say thank you immensely for the very rich conversations we've had, the contributions that we had, the sharing of the ideas, and congratulations to FCDO for a wonderful job in getting this principle to where they are today. And can I ask colleagues to, those online and in the room, to appreciate our panelists for what they've shared with us this morning. Thank you.